Like Roosevelt before him, Woodrow Wilson regarded himself as the personal representative of the people. No one but the president, he said, seems to be expected to look out for the general interests of the country. He developed a program of progressive reform and asserted international leadership in building a new world order. In 1917, he proclaimed American entrance into World War I a crusade to make the world safe for democracy. Wilson had seen the frightfulness of war. He was born in Virginia in 1856, the son of a Presbyterian minister who during the Civil War was a pastor in Augusta, Georgia, and during Reconstruction, a professor in the charged city of Columbia, South Carolina. Apparently dyslexic from childhood, Wilson did not learn to read until he was 10 and never became a rapid reader, yet still graduated from Princeton, then the College of New Jersey, and the University of Virginia Law School. Wilson earned his doctorate at Johns Hopkins University and entered upon an academic career. In 1885, he married Ellen Louise Axon. Wilson was the only professional academic to become president. He advanced rapidly as a conservative young professor of political science at various institutes, eventually winding up back at his alma mater and becoming president of Princeton in 1902. His growing national reputation led some conservative Democrats to consider him presidential timber. First, they persuaded him to run for governor of New Jersey in 1910. In the campaign, he asserted his independence of the conservatives and of the machine that had nominated him, endorsing a progressive platform which he pursued as governor. He was nominated for president at the 1912 Democratic Convention and campaigned on a program called The New Freedom, which stressed individualism and states' rights. In the three-way election, which included Teddy Roosevelt, he received only 42% of the popular vote, but an overwhelming electoral vote. The first thing President Wilson did was lower tariff rates which freed American consumers from artificially protected monopolies. Although it was indeed complicated, Wilson acted quickly, and as a result slashed taxes on imported goods. Wilson's second act was to pass the act creating the Federal Reserve System. The system served as the bank for both the banking community and the government, and has a major role in supervising banks to help stabilize the national banking system. A third victory came with the Clayton Antitrust Act, which strengthened existing laws against anti-competitive business actions and gave labor unions relief from court injunctions. Other new freedom legislation passed during Wilson's first term included an act improving working conditions for American sailors, the Warehouse Act, which helped farmers obtain loans, a bill providing greater self-government for the Philippines, and a bill prohibiting child labor. By virtue of this legislation and the slogan, "He kept us out of war," Wilson narrowly won re-election. But after the election, Wilson concluded that America could not remain neutral in the World War. On April 2, 1917, he asked Congress for a declaration of war on Germany. Massive American efforts slowly tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. During the war, Wilson was surprisingly effective. Recognizing what he did not understand, Wilson left all military decisions to the professional soldiers. It was the most efficient and corruption-free war effort to that time. Wilson went before Congress in January 1918 to enunciate American war aims, the 14 points, the last of which would establish a general association of nations, affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. Wilson decided to attend the Paris Peace Conference, despite the fact that no president had ever traveled overseas during his time in office. It was obvious from the beginning that it would be difficult to draw up a treaty to suit so many countries. The conference was a disaster for Wilson. He wanted a treaty that would make the world safe for democracy and ensure a lasting peace in Europe. As time went by, Wilson's interventions became unpopular in America itself. Americans had had enough of Europeans and wanted to return to isolationism. Wilson was the dominant figure in the conference, but he had to agree with harsher terms than he would have liked in order to get the Allies to agree to the League of Nations. Germany was made to pay for the war, and racial groups were to be given their own country. Wilson had lost a lot of support by the time he returned in 1919. Opposition had already gathered against the peace treaty, especially the League of Nations, for people feared that it would plunge the United States into future wars. Republican senators led by Henry Lodge threatened either to defeat the treaty by denying it the two-thirds needed for ratification or to attach stringent limits on the participation in the League. Wilson refused and went on a cross-country speaking tour to try to sway the nation. The strain, both mental and physical, was too much for him. He had a near breakdown on September 25th, after which his doctor canceled the rest of the tour and rushed him back to Washington. On October 2, 1919, Wilson suffered a massive stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his left side. His intellectual capacity was not affected, but his emotional balance and judgment was badly impaired. No one seriously suggested that Wilson resign. His wife Edith controlled access to him, made decisions by default, and engineered a cover-up of his condition. Although he gradually recovered from the worst effects of the stroke, Wilson never again fully functioned as president. Meanwhile, the Senate twice rejected the peace treaty as Wilson had refused to compromise. The United States never joined the League of Nations. Wilson left the White House in March 1921, a broken man. The 1920 election by a landslide victory won by the conservative Republican Warren Harding, who called for a return to normalcy and a repudiation of all Wilson's domestic and foreign politics. After leaving office, he retired to a house in Washington, D.C., and for the most part, he disappeared from public view. Wilson died in his sleep at his Washington home. His remains were interred in the newly begun National Cathedral. He is the only president buried in the capital city. During World War II, Wilson's reputation soared, as he came to be regarded as a wrongly unheeded prophet whose policies would have prevented world calamity. The United Nations and collective security pacts are viewed as fulfillment of Wilson's internationalist vision.